He was ready to say, "I do," but the very moment the bride walked in, 3 triplets burst into the church and shouted, "She abandoned us." Ethan Cole, a tech millionaire in New York, believed he had found the perfect woman after 6 months of a dreamlike romance. The lavish wedding at St. Patrick's seemed like the peak of happiness, but that accusation tore every illusion apart. His bride, Sloane Hart, the woman with whom he had planned an entire future, suddenly became a dark enigma. Who was telling the truth? The woman he loved, or the 3 abandoned children standing outside? And as Ethan began to investigate, the buried secrets proved far darker still. Can a perfect love survive the weight of a brutal truth? Ethan Cole adjusted his tie in the mirror of his office on the 58th floor of a glass tower in Manhattan. The man who once shook the tech market with billion-dollar deals now stood silently, staring at his own reflection not as a businessman, but as a man about to marry. At 39, success no longer concerned him. He had everything except a family, except real love. And then, Sloane walked into his life. That night, at a rooftop networking party overlooking the whole of New York, Ethan was ready to leave early after a string of bland conversations. Then he saw her, Sloane Hart. In a room full of extravagantly dressed guests, she was strikingly simple. A fitted black dress, no flashy jewelry, only bright eyes and a confident walk. No showiness, yet it was her quiet presence that made heads turn. They crossed paths at the bar. A brief smile, a casual hello, and the conversation flowed as if they had known each other for years. No empty flirting. She asked about contemporary art. He told her about the rare time he went to an exhibition. She offered sharp insights about the market that caught Ethan off guard. This woman was unlike anyone he had ever known. In the weeks that followed, they saw each other nearly every day. Winter in Manhattan became the backdrop of their story. Red wine in the penthouse, morning runs along the Hudson, quiet dinners in restaurants with only a few tables. Ethan was a man of calculation, used to controlling every detail of his life. But with Sloane, everything unfolded naturally, as if he had finally found a place to breathe. He took her to London on a business trip, and it was there on Westminster Bridge, with the sunset painting the Thames in gold, that Ethan realized he never wanted to live another day without her. The proposal came 3 weeks later, simple but certain. A slender platinum ring, a question without ornament. Sloane's answer was just as firm, "I do." His friends and colleagues were surprised, but they quickly embraced it. Anyone could see Sloane had it all: intelligence, confidence, charm at the right moment, silence at the right time. A woman who made others believe Ethan had finally found happiness. Ethan believed it most of all. On late nights, when she leaned against his shoulder in silence, he thought about how lucky he was. All those years of loneliness, only to wait for this moment. He didn't know that beneath that flawless surface, Sloane's past was like a locked room one day. Its door would swing open and sweep away everything he thought he knew. Alright then, my dear audience, if you're watching and find this story intriguing, drop a comment with the number 1, or say, "I'm still here," to keep listening. Ethan Cole's wedding day was spoken of in the press as a true society event. Not ostentatious, but every detail carried the refinement of a man used to controlling every number, every step of his life. St. Patrick's Cathedral, with its towering stained glass windows spilling light onto the marble floor, blazed in the spring afternoon. 200 guests, business leaders, politicians, artists, sat neatly in rows, whispering to one another as the organ played. Ethan stood at the altar, his heart pounding. For the first time in years, he was trembling not from the pressure of work, but from happiness. His best friend, Daniel, leaned close and murmured, "There she is, the woman who could bring Ethan Cole to his knees." The great doors opened. Sloane Hart appeared. No veil, no excessive jewelry, only a strapless white gown hugging her frame and a bouquet of white lilies. She walked with steady confidence, each step as though she had always belonged on this path. Every eye turned toward her. Some of the women whispered, their envy barely hidden. Light streamed through the stained glass, casting small rainbows across Sloane's short black hair. Ethan looked at her and suddenly remembered the nights she had leaned against his shoulder, the mornings they had shared by the window. It all seemed to lead to this moment. A new life, a perfect beginning. But then, perfection shattered in an instant. Bang! The slam of the wooden door thundered like a storm. The music cut off. A few women gasped aloud. The entire cathedral turned. 3 children stood in the doorway. Small, lost, their clothes worn thin, hair disheveled. But their faces, 3 identical faces, held such sternness it froze the air. They panted, as if they had run a long way. No one spoke. Time seemed to stop. One of them raised his voice, ringing through the silence. She heard us, and after our father died, she left us on the streets. A wave of whispers erupted. A guest choked on a cough. Another covered her mouth. Ethan froze, his blood turning to ice. He turned to Sloane. She was still smiling, but for a fleeting instant, he saw fear flash in her eyes. Just one blink and it was gone, replaced with a mask of polite irritation. "Ethan," she whispered, "call someone to take them out. Clearly they don't belong here." Daniel started down the aisle, ready to defuse the situation. But then the second child stepped forward, his voice sharp and clear. "You married our father, Thomas Whitlow." The cathedral exploded. A horrified murmur rippled across the pews. Ethan felt as though a bucket of ice water had been dumped over him. He turned to Sloane, waiting for an explanation. But her face hardened, expressionless like porcelain. "Ridiculous," she said, her voice calm to the point of menace. "I've never heard the name Thomas Whitlow in my life." But those eyes, 3 pairs, identical, burning, never left her. And for the first time, Ethan felt the foundation of his life begin to quake. And before we continue with the main story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit like on this video. Oh, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, we'd love to know. The air inside St. Patrick's Cathedral froze solid. Quiet breaths, the rustle of fabric all blended into a heavy silence. 3 children stood motionless at the doors, their eyes locked on the bride as if the entire world had narrowed to just them and that woman. Ethan swallowed hard and turned to Sloane. He wanted to see her flustered, to hear a trembling denial. But no. She held her posture back straight, chin tilted, a thin smile sharp as a blade. "Ethan," she said, just loud enough for him to hear. "This is a cheap trick. You know it. You're rich. People will do anything to ruin our happiness." He looked at the 3 small faces. They didn't look like children coached by someone else. Their clothes were dirty, their shoes worn through, but their eyes blazed with certainty. The eldest spoke. "She abandoned us. Our father, Thomas Whitlow, died, and she sold the house and threw us out." A hiss escaped from the back pew. A woman covered her mouth. A few guests exchanged horrified glances. Sloane turned to face the crowd, her voice ringing clear. "Ridiculous. I've never heard that name in my life. These children are obviously being used." She spun back, her gaze like steel. "Ethan, will you believe them? Or the woman who's been by your side for 6 months, who has never hidden a thing from you?" He choked on the words. 6 months true. She had never once slipped. Every conversation, every trip, every smile had been flawless. But one memory burned in him, the flicker of fear in her eyes when the children appeared. Now it felt like a warning sign. The smallest child spoke, voice trembling but steady. "We're not lying. She saw us crying, but she turned away." Another wave of whispers rippled through the pews. Someone stood and left. The minister fumbled his book shut, looking at Ethan for direction. Ethan felt his blood surge hot. This was the moment every eye was on him. He was not a man easily shaken, but what truth stood before him now? A woman coldly denying everything, or 3 trembling children brave enough to face a crowd? He drew a long breath. "I think we have to postpone this ceremony." A collective gasp thundered through the church. Sloane whipped toward him, her blue eyes blazing with fury. She seized his arm, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. "You cannot be serious. You're going to let 3 homeless brats ruin everything?" Ethan looked down at her hand, the fingers that once intoxicated him now clamped like claws. He pulled free, slowly. "I need to know what's going on, and I need the truth." For 3 seconds, she stood frozen. Then, like a sudden storm, her face shifted from graceful to vicious, from smiling to sneering. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low, metallic. "I wasted 6 months of my life on you." And so, under the horrified stares of the guests, Sloane turned, striding down the aisle. The crowd split like receding water. Before vanishing, she spun back and shouted, "You're a fool, Ethan Cole. They're lying, and you just lost the best thing you ever had." The slam of the doors echoed through the cathedral like thunder. The three children remained still, silent. Then, as if bound by an unspoken pact, they clasped hands, turned, and walked out the same way Sloane had gone. No words, no backward glance. Ethan stood rooted, his heart heavy as stone. Whispers swelled behind him. His best friend laid a hand on his shoulder. The minister muttered about rescheduling. His assistant stared at him in confusion. But nothing could erase the feeling. His world had shattered right before his eyes. 3 days after the shattered wedding, Ethan Cole sat in his car outside the Plaza Hotel, staring through the misted glass at the golden streaks of light spilling from the lobby. A soft rain had fallen all afternoon, wrapping New York in a thin veil, dreamlike yet suffocating. On his phone screen, the short message glowed again. "Room 417, 8 p.m. We need to talk." No exclamation marks, no emojis, just a flat command. He walked into the lobby, passing elegantly dressed guests, their laughter mingling with the chime of clinking glasses. Everything seemed so normal it felt alien. The elevator carried him to the 4th floor, where the thick carpet and muted yellow lights made the hallway look more like a stage set than a place to live. Ethan stopped at room 417, knocked 3 times. The door swung open instantly, as if she had been waiting. Sloane Hart stood there in a charcoal suit, hair pulled back, lips painted a sharp red. She did not look like a woman abandoned at the altar, but like someone about to deliver an important presentation. The room behind her was immaculate to the point of sterility. A suitcase closed tight beside the dresser, a bed perfectly made, no trace of someone who had stayed for days. No photos, no books, no cosmetics. The entire room felt like a stage prepared for a performance calculated in advance. Ethan stepped inside, catching a faint scent of black tea. She poured herself a cup with precise movements, but never offered him one. He stood by the window, gazing down at 5th Avenue, its lights smeared by rain. After several minutes of silence, Sloane spoke, her voice level, as if delivering a report. That wedding was nothing but an incident. The word struck Ethan like a hollow blow. An incident? He remembered the moment the church doors flew open, 3 young faces, breathless, voices trembling but resolute. Their accusation had not been clumsy theater, it had been too real. And here, in this polished room, the woman he had once trusted completely was dismissing it all with a cold detachment that raised the hairs on his skin. She claimed the children were tools of someone trying to destroy his happiness, that the world was full of people hungry for money and fame, that the strange name Thomas Whitlow was nothing more than a planted detail to make the story convincing. The explanation was smooth, logical, persuasive enough that if he only listened and didn't look, he might have believed. But he remembered clearly that flicker in her eyes that day, a raw flash of fear before she regained composure. What chilled him wasn't what she said, but what she didn't. She never once asked where the children were, if they were safe, if someone was exploiting them. No curiosity, no compassion, only a controlled anger masked by calm. He turned to look at her. Her posture was straight, her gaze unshaken, her flawless face hard as porcelain. This was no longer the Sloane who had made him believe in simple love. This was a sharper, colder version, leaving no cracks to see through. Perhaps this was her true self, and the past 6 months had been nothing but a flawless performance. In that moment, Ethan realized he stood at a crossroads. On one side was the woman who had once been his only anchor. On the other, 3 homeless children carrying an unbelievable story. He couldn't tell which was truth and which was lies. But one thing was undeniable. Sloane's silence about the children, what should have been a small detail, had become the largest proof of all. He nodded slightly, saying he needed time. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply nodded in return, as if rescheduling a meeting. "I'll be here for a few days," she said evenly. "When you're ready, you know where to find me." He left the room. As the door closed behind him, the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, heavy with silence. In the elevator, his heart pounded not from anger, but from an unease creeping deep into his chest. Her words had been too smooth, but that very smoothness had drained them of life. And more than anything, he realized the most haunting detail. Throughout their entire conversation, Sloane had never once asked about the fate of the 3 children. As he stepped back into the lobby, Ethan knew the first seed of doubt had taken root. It would grow, unstoppable, until he uncovered the truth himself. If those children had not been lying, then who exactly was the woman he once thought he would spend his life with? 1 week after the ruined wedding, Ethan Cole's office on the 40th floor of the glass tower still burned with light late into the night. The city below glittered with thousands of points, but to him, everything blurred behind the film of drizzle on the window. On his desk lay unsigned contracts, projects left unreviewed, all abandoned. He had once thrived in a world of numbers and meticulous plans, but since the 3 children appeared, his life had veered off the rails. The phone rang. His assistant said Ava Park had arrived. He nodded, feeling his chest tighten. Ava wasn't just his longtime attorney, she was one of the very few people he truly trusted. When she entered, her dark suit still carried the scent of rain, her steps firm, her gaze steady but edged with warning. "Ethan," she said softly, setting her leather case on the desk, "you need to see these files." He nodded, silent. His hand clenched as Ava opened the case, pulling out a thick dossier, pages neatly clipped, yet heavy with secrets. The first name froze his pulse. Thomas Whitlow. A photo came with it. A thin man with a red beard, gentle eyes looking straight at the camera. Beside him stood 3 identical girls, brown-haired, radiant smiles, holding bouquets of wildflowers. The picture was taken in a garden, drenched in golden light, radiating the peace of a simple family. He was a professor of English literature at a small university, Ava explained. He died of heart failure 8 months ago. His wife, Helen, had passed from cancer 3 years before that. They had 3 daughters, triplets, Nora, June, and Mira. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the names sink in. They were no longer the inventions of children crashing into a church. They were real lives. Ava went on, calm but firm. "Sloane Hart, the woman you were going to marry, married Thomas Whitlow 2.5 years ago. A small backyard wedding. Neighbors confirmed it. After Thomas died, she sold the house and all the assets herself. But from that point on, there are no records of the children, no adoption papers, no official reports. They disappeared." The office went utterly still, save for the rain tapping against the glass. Ethan opened another folder. There was Sloane, on her wedding day, in a simple blue dress, a serene smile, her arm around Thomas's waist. In front of them, 3 little girls in bright floral dresses, clutching wildflowers. A complete family. And now, this same woman denied it all, denied even the existence of those children. "There's something else," Ava said, her voice slowing. "Before Thomas, there was another man, Martin Reynolds, a successful businessman. He died 6 months after marrying Sloane, said to be of natural causes. She inherited a significant sum." Quote. The words cut Ethan like ice. The fragments began slotting together, forming a picture far darker than he had imagined. The woman he had loved for 6 months wasn't a strong, independent figure. She was someone who lived by stepping over the lives of others, leaving behind ashes and abandoned souls. He turned to the window, the city lights glittering but suddenly alien. In his chest burned not just betrayal, but a rising fury. Fury at being deceived. Fury that 3 children bore the weight of her cruelty. "And the kids?" he asked quietly, his voice low. "Has anyone found them?" Ava shook her head. No official trace. Only one police report. Neighbors once saw them sleeping in a park after their father died. By the time officers arrived, they were gone. The air in the office thickened. Ethan sat motionless, his hand tracing the photograph of the 3 girls. Their bright eyes clung to him, unrelenting. From this moment on, he knew the path ahead wasn't a choice, it was a duty. Whatever Sloane was hiding, however dark her truth ran, one fact stood unshakable. Those children were out there, alone, vulnerable. And they had found the courage to burst into a wedding, to confront the woman who had abandoned them. Ethan closed the file, lifting his gaze to Ava. Pain still burned in his eyes, but beneath it was a resolve harder than steel. "We have to find them," he said, "before she makes her next move." The report Ava sent Ethan contained one small detail that made him pause. A shop owner near Hamilton Square had once complained to the police about 3 children selling homemade candy right outside his store. No permit, no guardian. The man was merely annoyed about losing customers. But for Ethan, it was the most valuable lead yet. That gray afternoon, he drove to Hamilton Square, an old-style park with an Art Deco fountain at its center and rows of ancient trees casting shadows over the stone paths. This wasn't a place he usually came. His life had been bound to boardrooms, hotels, airports, not parks where children ran or families spread out picnic blankets. And yet today, every step on the damp pavement felt like he was walking deeper into a world he had never known. He moved slowly, eyes scanning each bench, each hidden corner. The park was quiet. Only a few old men playing chess under the pavilion, and a couple sheltering from the drizzle under an umbrella. No sign of the three faces that haunted him. Just as he was about to give up, he caught a faint movement under the great oak tree in the far corner. He walked closer, heart pounding. Three small figures huddled together on an old bench, one of them carefully arranging foil-wrapped candies in a battered shoebox. The other two sat silent, watchful eyes following passers-by. No matter the distance, Ethan knew instantly Nora, June, and Mira. He stopped, forcing his voice calm. "Hello there." All three froze. Nora, the eldest, nudged her sisters. They all turned to look at him at once. In those young eyes was a weariness far beyond their years, and a sharpness that felt almost chilling. Ethan took a few steps closer, keeping space. "I'm Ethan Cole. We met at the church." "So?" A heavy silence. Then June, her voice raspy as though pressed down for too long, whispered, "You were going to marry her." Ethan shook his head slightly. "I'm not marrying Sloane anymore." The three exchanged quick glances, a silent conversation that felt both mysterious and heartbreaking to Ethan. Mira, the smallest, whispered something timidly. Nora gave a slight nod. Then Nora fixed her gaze on him, eyes both probing and carrying an authority far too old for her age. "Why are you looking for us?" The question was short but razor sharp. Ethan drew a long breath. He knew this wasn't childish suspicion, it was a test of whether a grown man could be trusted after adults had already cost them everything. "Because," he said slowly, "that day, you changed my life. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, and I believe you deserve to be heard, and to be safe." No immediate answer. Again, the children exchanged glances. At last, Nora tilted her head, signaling for him to sit. He lowered himself onto the edge of the stone bench, keeping a respectful distance. For the first time in days, he felt less like a millionaire in a power suit, and more like just a man, facing three fragile lives, trying to earn back a shred of their trust. On the shoebox, the tiny candies glimmered faintly through wrinkled foil. Ethan asked gently, "You make these to sell?" June nodded. "Mom taught us before she died." "Helen," Ethan murmured, and instantly the three pairs of eyes lit up with alarm. "That's right, isn't it? Your mother's name was Helen." "How do you know that?" Nora demanded. Ethan was honest. "I looked into it. I know about your father, Thomas Whitlow. And I know Sloane was married to him." The air seemed to freeze. The young faces fell, sadness spreading like a dark cloud. Mira whispered, "She lied. She told us she was Mom's friend." Nora clenched her fists, her voice steady but trembling faintly. At first, she was kind. But after she married Dad, she changed. If we made noise, she would get angry, she would throw away our drawings. She said Dad gave us too much and not enough to her. June picked up bitterly. When Dad got sick, she pretended to take care of him. But when he died, she sold the house. One day we came back from school, and the locks were changed. Our things were dumped on the porch. She said we weren't her problem anymore. The three voices blended together, each detail like a cold blade driven into Ethan's chest. He forced himself to stay calm. These children had already seen enough of adult anger. But inside, every word fanned the fire of his rage. How could someone abandon children right after they'd lost their father? He listened in silence until Nora finished. "We take care of each other. We don't need anyone's pity." Ethan looked at their small faces and saw not just pain, but a strange strength, the strength of children forced to grow up too soon. He understood then. They hadn't stormed his wedding out of vengeance, but to stop him from repeating their father's tragedy. The rain began to fall harder. Nora stood, tugging her sisters with her. "We have somewhere to go," she said, her eyes watchful. Ethan gave a slow nod. "Just one thing I ask. Let me help. Not charity, but what's right." The three exchanged another wordless glance. Then Nora gave a small nod. Only tonight, until the rain stops. Ethan smiled, a weight lifting from his chest. He knew this was only the beginning, but at least he had found them. And this time, he would not let them disappear again. Ethan Cole's penthouse, once known for its precision and cold order, had never been as alive as it was that night. The sound of small shoes tapping against hardwood, whispers mingling with bursts of giggles, echoed through halls that had been used to absolute silence. The three children, still in their rain-soaked clothes, stepped in with eyes filled with both awe and wariness. Ethan opened a cabinet, pulled out crisp white towels, and pointed toward the bathroom. The children glanced at one another before shuffling in, the rush of water soon filling the air. Meanwhile, he called Sandra, his trusted assistant, and asked her to pick up essentials, clean clothes, children's shampoo, and if possible, a few books and small toys. Sandra didn't ask questions. She only said, "I'll take care of it right away." He moved into the kitchen and put together a simple dinner: sandwiches, sliced fruit, cookies, and milk. For years, this expansive kitchen had been reserved for lavish parties or meals prepared by a private chef. Tonight was the first time he used it to prepare food for someone else out of genuine care. When the children returned, their hair damp and their faces scrubbed clean, freckles visible now that the dirt was gone, they seemed transformed. His oversized clothes draped over them like long gowns, making them look oddly endearing, peaceful even. They sat at the table, hesitating for a moment before beginning to eat. Ethan noticed every movement, how carefully they handled utensils, how they waited for one another, signs of a proper upbringing before everything fell apart. The meal went slowly, but not tensely as he had feared. Mira smiled shyly when he offered more cookies. June eagerly described how they used to make candy to sell. Nora stayed quiet, but her eyes never left him, weighing, testing whether he was truly worthy of trust. When Sandra arrived with bags, the apartment seemed to glow again. New clothes, toothbrushes, shampoo, even a few children's books were neatly laid out on the table. Mira gasped softly at the sight of pink unicorn pajamas, her wide eyes sparkling with rare delight. Nora, speaking for them all, said thank you with a solemnity far too heavy for a child. It broke something in Ethan's chest. Children shouldn't have to carry gratitude like a burden. That night, Ethan prepared the sofa bed in the living room, but the girls insisted on sleeping together in the big bed. "We always sleep together," June explained firmly. He didn't argue, only helped settle their blankets and left the hallway light on low. Before he could leave, Nora looked at him and asked quietly, "Just tonight, right? When the rain stops, we'll go." Ethan froze, then answered with steady certainty, "For now, stay here. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what comes next." Her eyes softened at that, not because of a hollow promise, but because of a simple truth enough to let them finally close their eyes in peace. When he peeked in later, all three were curled beneath the blanket, breathing evenly, their faces relaxed. For the first time since the ruined wedding, his chest felt lighter. In the days that followed, the apartment began to change. The once silent library now carried the rustle of small fingers turning pages as Nora devoured old business books he'd left behind. The kitchen grew warmer with June's excitement in helping prepare breakfast, sometimes inventing odd recipes that made him laugh aloud. Mira, the quietest of the three, began humming softly while sketching with the colored pencils Sandra had brought, a tiny melody, yet full of peace. Ethan watched it all, and a certainty took root. This was no accident. This was a turning point. He had let Sloane into his life without ever questioning her, and paid with heartbreak. With these three children, he would not repeat the same mistake. One evening, standing at the window overlooking the city, he remembered something his father used to say: "You always have a choice, and that choice reveals who you really are." For the first time in years, Ethan knew exactly who he wanted to be. Not just a millionaire signing contracts in boardrooms, but a man brave enough to stand for the three fragile lives that had walked into his world. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Ava: "Start the process. I want to find a way to protect these children, whatever it takes." The last night of the first week, New York outside was still loud with blaring horns and lights that never went out. But inside Ethan Cole's penthouse, a new kind of stillness wrapped around the space. On the large bed, three little girls slept peacefully, their breaths steady, curled together like one inseparable whole. Ethan stood in the dark hallway, quietly watching. He had once believed his life was nothing but a series of carefully calculated plans, each move designed to reach a bigger goal, a bigger number. Yet none of those numbers had ever brought him the sense of wholeness he felt in this moment, knowing that 3 small lives were placing their trust in him. Sloane's betrayal had broken him, but it was these 3 children who lifted him back up. They hadn't come seeking charity, they had given him something instead, a chance. A chance to choose who he would be when faced with the dark. Ethan knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, legal battles, public scrutiny, and above all, Sloane's inevitable return, because she would never leave the game unfinished. But he also knew he was no longer alone. 3 identical pairs of eyes had looked straight at him, laying on his shoulders the heaviest and most beautiful responsibility of his life. And in Ethan's heart, a fierce resolve had ignited. He would protect them at any cost.